Elegant lesson, edited machine translation, one stranger. Woha! Stranger. Kiowawawawa, I suppose. There was a ferocious scream, and two figures were thrown into the air. A large figure and a small figure were holding hands, sharing each other's fate. Some people would see this as a friendly relationship, but that was not the right description for this situation, because a lapse in judgment would lead to the same end for both of them. Stranger and stranger. Ah, phew! They spilled that out, turned their eyes, and rolled on the ground, knocking them out with a few. The boy and the young girl, who had no energy to fight back, were completely taken care of as a set. A shadow suddenly appeared beside them, without making a sound. Stranger, unfortunately, there is no room for talk at all. Child's play. Yes, it was the calm tone of voice that mercilessly commented on the two collapsed people. The owner of the voice tone was also a person with a neutral appearance who did not betray the impression of the tone of voice. His dark blue hair was carefully styled, and his sharp, intelligent eyes were adorned with a monocle, an intellectual item. His tall, slender body was kept in a breathtakingly beautiful posture, embodying a kind of perfection. This impression was accentuated by his cool, sweat-free profile. This was especially true when you viewed the out-of-breath, sweaty boy and girl, Subaru and Beatrice, at his feet. The two of them sat up weakly on their knees and looked down at each other. Subaru, huff huff, I can't talk back. Beatrice, Betty is the great spirit Beatrice, and you call it child's play. In fact, you'll be howling in no time, I suppose. Stranger, even your arguments against me are not unified. You cannot possibly achieve your goal with that. Disappointment. Shaking their heads loosely, Subaru and Beatrice sagged at the words of the man who was the incarnation of serenity. Subaru could not even talk back, at least not in this state of mind. It was Subaru and Beatrice who asked for training, but honestly speaking, they thought they could do a little better. Their hubris was shattered and they felt bad about it. But stranger, are we done here? Resignation. Subaru, hick, wait, there's more. Beatrice, if you think this is where it ends, you're wrong, in fact. At the question of resignation, Subaru and Beatrice shouted at the same time. Unlike the previous exchange, the only thing they shared in common was a sense of defeat, and upon hearing this, the person with the monocle, Clind, nodded his head with a slight narrowing of his eyes. Clind, splendid, so again, please, guidance. Subaru, your carelessness will be the death of you, Clind-san. Let's do this, Biko. Beatrice, of course, Betty will let him have it, I suppose. Subaru and Beatrice, who had gotten up and laughed at their bad impressions of each other, jumped at Clind, who was relaxed and ready to give them a shot. Clind, ill-prepared, Subaru and Beatrice, off you. However, the unimaginative attack was easily seen through, and the two bodies flew through the air again. Subaru, we're both down again. Subaru and Beatrice, Anyaya. Blinking her eyes at the sight of Subaru and Beatrice being blown away while screaming, Emilia, waving her hands up and down, was both happy and sad. It had been about 10 minutes since this practice started, but Emilia already lost count of the number of times Subaru and Beatrice had tasted the ground with both hands. From the looks of it, Clind was doing a good job of rolling them around, but Emilia was on the edge of her seat, watching to make sure they didn't get hurt. Stranger, Emily, the change will not come so quickly. It is all about daily accumulation etiquette and study, is it not? Emilia, Anne. It was a young girl with a prim face who advised Emilia to do so in response to her reaction. When she heard the words from a girl roughly 10 years younger than herself, Emilia choked up a little and then slumped her shoulders. Emilia couldn't argue with that. She knew she was right. Emilia, but I do get worried. I think it can't be helped when you try so hard. Anne, that is Emily's virtue, but it is a groundless fear. Do you not think so too, Frederica? Frederica, yes, you are right, Anna Rose Sama. The one who responded to the girl's question was Frederica, an elegant maid with long golden hair, beautiful emerald green eyes, and strikingly good looks. Accompanying Emilia to serve the tea party, she prepared the tea and turned her gaze to the garden beyond the balcony. That was where the practicing Subaru and Beatrice had been dominating the conversation for a while now. However, Emilia tilted her head at the attitude of the girl and Frederica, who seemed to understand each other. Emilia, does that mean I'm worrying too much? Frederica, yes, But I think that cannot be helped. Emilia-sama has only had dealings with Clind for a few days after the misunderstanding. Emilia. It was a misunderstanding at that time. I made a really embarrassing mistake. The topic of discussion was Emilia's memories of unforgettable failures and experiences. When she was still living with Puck in the Great Ilior Forest, Roswal arrived to tell her about the upcoming royal selection and that she was a candidate. After listening to him, Emilia decided to take part in the royal selection in order to free the people of the frozen forest and village. Emilia left the forest with this resolve, but due to a slight misunderstanding, she ended up staying at the mansion of Roswal's relative Anna Rose for a while instead of Roswal's mansion. And also, Emilia, I know I was being really rude, even though I wasn't a real maid. I dressed up like one and did a maid's job. Frederica, not at all, Emilia-sama. I was not able to tell you at the time because of my position and responsibilities, but it suited you so well that it would be wonderful to see again. Emilia, really? When you say that, I feel relieved. That's right. The last time I talked to Subaru about it, he said he wanted to see me in a maid's outfit. Anna Rose. Please refrain from showing that to Natsuki Subaru. He will take advantage of the situation. Frederica's words, which would wipe away her past mistakes, were, however, interrupted by Anna Rose Mylode, the girl who shared the memory of the incident. Anna Rose smiled at the puzzled Emilia, asking, "Is that satisfactory?" Anna Rose, it is true that you and Natsuki Subaru are master and knight, but that is exactly why you have to have very clear boundaries between you, Emily. You easily cause misunderstandings, so we do not want Natsuki Subaru to have any unnecessary expectations. Frederica. Anna Rose-sama, since this is a relationship between Emilia-sama and Subaru-sama, it would be best if we did not interfere too much, Anna Rose. Please refrain, Frederica. It is a lady's consideration, not to mislead men. Frederica's eyebrows lowered in a troubled manner as Anna Rose gave her a sharp rebuke. However, there was no doubt that Anna Rose was saying this because she was being considerate of Emilia. Everyone in the mansion also told her to think seriously about her master-servant relationship with Subaru. For that reason, she recently had been trying to restrain herself from going around boasting, "Hey, that's my knight," to everyone she met. In truth, she had really wanted to do so, but Emilia. Besides, Anne is right. I think that I also need to reflect on the fact that I tend to mislead the people around me. I suppose that's why I ended up becoming a maid. Anna Rose. No, that incident was my family's fault. For me, it was the beginning of my meeting you, Emily, and having this relationship. It was the very important first act of our story. Emilia. Anna Rose. I can still remember it. You gave me that beautiful snowy scene as a gift to say goodbye to me. The young girl closed her eyes and talked as if enraptured by her speech. In contrast to Anna Rose, Emilia, however, lowered her eyebrows apologetically. Emilia. I'm sorry, Anne. It was Puck who did it, but now he's gone to sleep for a really long time, so I can't show you the same thing. Anna Rose. I did not mean to pressure you. Emilia. Is that right? Emilia's eyes widened when it was pointed out that the apology she had felt was misplaced. Anna Rose, who put her hand to her forehead and said, "Good grief, Emily." But it seemed to Emilia like she was a very elegant lady, despite her young appearance. If you did not compare their appearances, it was difficult to tell which one was older than the other. Of course, there was a difference in the way Anna Rose, who had survived the swirling aristocracy at the age of 9, and Emilia, who had spent her life leisurely in a forest with little change, had been polished. In any case, Frederica, I am sure the master thinks it is a good opportunity for you to learn about these things as well. Frederica exhaled as she looked at the two girls, sensing her master's intentions. Frederica's master, a man of many wiles, liked to use roundabout and distorted expressions and instructions. She guessed this was just another one of his mischievous tricks. Even so, for better or worse, Frederica had such a strong trust in him that she knew he was making plans that would lead to proper results. Subaru and Beatrice. Anyaya. Emilia. They got hit again. With a flashy sound, Subaru and Beatrice shot up into the air again, and Emilia panicked as she watched them writhe in pain. Frederica wondered how many times she would see this scene during their lessons away from home, and vaguely thought about the blue sky. 2. This was about a month after the incident at the sanctuary was resolved. Stranger. Veil up. Stranger. Yeah, I think that's what we need. And to Amelia's wondering face, Subaru held out his hands and explained forcefully. The location was the office on the top floor of the new Roswell mansion, replacing the burned-down Roswell mansion. There, Subaru strongly emphasized the need for training program for the future. Subaru, it's been fierce battle after fierce battle. I know it's depressing for me to say it myself, but you can feel the trouble coming and the level of enemies steadily rising. Stranger. Of course, I had devised some creative adjustments to make that happen. Subaru. You're making me feel worse than I already am. You should be sorry. The one who shrugged his shoulders when he was yelled at like that was Roswell, whose remorse was hidden behind his makeup. In fact, on the day that Subaru was summoned to this other world, Roswell, who seemed to have been planning for the hardship that befell Emilia in the royal capital, admitted his mistake and apologized. But even now, Subaru could not be too careful. If anything, Subaru even felt that the maliciousness of his antics seemed to be increasing every day. However, Emilia, Roswell, don't tease Subaru like that. If you do, we won't know if we can trust you, right? Stranger. Betty agrees, I suppose. It is, however, painful to see you being scolded head-on by the half-devil, Emilia like this, in fact. It serves him right, I suppose. Roswell. GRR. The two people who could silence Roswell were on a roll. They were Emilia, who preached remorse with pure sincerity, and Beatrice, who put on the face of an absolute ally by Subaru's side. Roswell seemed vulnerable to Emilia, who had grown up because of the sanctuary and begun walking the path of the ultimate beautiful girl, and Beatrice, who had become active after leaving the forbidden library. Even now, they seemed to be Roswell's natural enemies. Roswell was able to say something back to Subaru in a relaxed manner, but he only clammed up at the two girls' words. Anyway, Subaru. Roswell's shenanigans aside, I'm serious about my proposal. It's imperative that we level up to counter future threats. Stranger. Does that mean you want to hone your skills and master your craft? Subaru. Yes, that. That's what I'm talking about, Frederica. When his point finally got across, Subaru motioned to Frederica, the last to gather in the office, for a high five. She raised her hand lightly and responded with a wry smile, and she was kind. The ultimate maid. Subaru. No, I want to give the title of Supreme Maid to Rem, so super excellent, that sounds a bit off. How about something like Finest Maid? Frederica. You are too kind to give me such a kind assessment. I will humbly accept your kind offer. Subaru was left hanging when Frederica, while putting her hand to her mouth and smiling, elegantly avoided him. Despite the light-hearted banter that went on in the background, Subaru proposed it with serious and earnest intent. Of course, at the root of it all was the unchanging truth that boys want to be strong. Subaru, I've officially become Emilia Tan's knight, and I'm a spiritual arts user in a loving contract with Biko. It's about time I got a grip on my mind and body. Emilia. But Subaru works hard every day on special training in the courtyard. And look, you and Garfield always get along well, right? Subaru. It's super lovely to see the world is so kind in Emilia Tan's eyes, but the reality of that training scene is not that harmonious. Emilia's expression was warm and soft, but the reality was very different. As she had said, since moving to the new mansion, Subaru had hoped to solicit training from Garfield, a new fighter in the camp, in order to level up his skills. The new face in the camp was a fighter with a hand-to-hand fighting style, so it was a long-awaited presence for the Emilia camp, which had many magic users. Subaru, who was neither good at magic nor martial arts, thought they seemed to be the perfect person to ask for lessons. Subaru, but when we started training together, the material was so different that I couldn't handle it, and on top of that, he overestimates me like crazy. Beatrice. Betty didn't see it firsthand, but she heard that Subaru defeated him with that ground dragon, in fact. That was a big deal, I suppose. Subaru. We did, but it took 4 of us to beat him. To be precise, it was correct to say that in addition to the continuous battle between Garfield, Otto, and Ram, Subaru had been cut down, and Patrash had put the finishing touches on the fight. Simply connecting this to Subaru's victory was a bad way of putting it, even before Garfield turned out to be 14 years old. Subaru. If we went head-to-head, I couldn't do anything about it. He should know that, but he's not very good at holding back. Roswell. Maybe he's still upset about losing in the sanctuary and wants to use this training as an excuse to kill Yao. Subaru. If that smile had any truth behind it, I'd lose faith in humanity. Subaru could not continue the conversation if he were teased every time. While having Beatrice glare at Roswell with a garururu, Subaru looked at Frederica and Subaru. That's why I want to take care of the situation. For example, have Frederica tell Garfield to go easy on Frederica. Frederica. Subaru. What's wrong, Frederica? I'm not sure what it is, but your face is red all the way up to your ears. Frederica's face was red as she remained silent in front of Subaru, who asked for her help. When Subaru and Emilia were worried about her face, which had turned red up to her ears, Frederica was the one who was worried. She shook her head, letting a weak no escape. Frederica. You see, Garf's poor technique is possibly my fault. Subaru. Oh, why? As a boy, did you beat his soul down from childhood to the point where he has to stand up to anyone he comes across with his full strength? Frederica. Not really, but when we were young, there were no other children in the sanctuary other than Garf and I, Subaru. Because no one else was there. Frederica. I am afraid that I have been playing around. Emilia. I think it's really great that you're good friends, so what's the problem? Frederica. No, I mean... Unable to understand Frederica's sense of embarrassment, Emilia innocently asked back. Subaru also roughly grasped the situation from Frederica's rough appearance. Although Frederica and Garfield were siblings, there was an age difference of 6 or 7 years between them. Whatever the case may be today, the impact of the age difference in childhood was significant, even if they were a boy and girl. Subaru, it's the difference between 1st and 7th graders. Moreover, considering the number of years Frederica had been away from the sanctuary, she would have been younger than a 1st grader when she played with Garfield. The influence of the original experience is immeasurable. Otherwise, there would be no proverb like, a tiger can't change his stripes. Subaru. In other words, Garfield is in such a state because of his unrestrained sister's influence. Frederica, the way you said that. The way you say that, it was malicious. Even if it is true that I am an influence, I will insist it was. However, even if the jury acknowledged the validity of Frederica's claim, it would not change the troubling reality of the situation. In any case, the balance of power was too great for Garfield to compete with Subaru's training. Garfield could heal some injuries with his magic, but there was a limit. Subaru. I'm not going to let Otto teach me how to fight off thugs. But my pride won't allow me to let Otto teach me how to fight off thugs the Suin way. Emilia. Oh, you're being so selfish. Otto-kun seems to be a good teacher. Subaru. I know, but even if they taught me, the chance of me being able to use it would be too limited, and I wouldn't be able to handle it. In addition, the Suin style of fighting off thugs passed down in Otto's family had already proven to be ineffective against Garfield. So it was far from the technique Subaru is looking for. What Subaru needed was a way to counter the threats that would continue to stand in his way, ideally, a Reinhard-like power that could defeat any enemy. Subaru. I know that's a tall order, so I'd at least like to have a little trick to buy some time to stall them until Garfield can come running. Beatrice. That's another greed-free story, in fact. Roswell. I think it's an appropriate idea, though, that you're in your element. Beatrice and Roswell made their own comments after hearing what Subaru wanted there. Meanwhile, during the same conversation, Emilia pondered with a, Subaru. Emilia-tan, what do you object to? Emilia. No, it's not like that. It's just that if Subaru is in danger, I'll protect him, and I want him to be able to rely on me, too. Subaru. Well, basically, the way the situation was set up earlier, I was under the impression that I was fighting with Emilia-tan behind me, protecting her from a surprise enemy. In the first place, the idea for this case came from Subaru's official appointment as Emilia's knight. If a decision relied on Emilia's power, it would all be for nothing. Subaru, anyway, I'm a boy who wants to be strong enough to protect Emilia-tan, and now that I've made a contract with Biko, I want new techniques or even a second form. Beatrice. Subaru can't help making so much noise, I suppose. If you really want the second form, you can carry Betty on your shoulders, in fact. Subaru. It's not that kind of extended children's game. While arguing back, Subaru picked up Beatrice by the shoulders and swung the little girl around with a joyful kaya. At the sight of Subaru and Beatrice, Roswal clapped his hands and said, "Okay, Roswal. I understand what you want, Subaru-kun. I don't doubt your feelings." Subaru. Does that mean you have a guess who I am training with? Roswal. That's right. Why don't you ask Ram to do it for you? Subaru. It's not for nothing, but I wonder if she'll teach me right. Subaru had a great deal of trust in Ram, both in terms of ability and relationship. But at the same time, he did not feel that Ram was suited to the role of a mentor. There was even a fear that she would use her position to hurt Subaru under false pretenses. If he was not careful, he could end up with nothing to show for it, except for aching muscles and a broken body, unlike Garfield, where he could learn something while getting hurt. Besides, this was just Subaru's selfishness, but Subaru. I don't want Ram to have to deal with me for a while. I want her to stay with Rem. Emilia. Subaru. After returning from the sanctuary, the sisters Ram and Rem were finally able to see each other, but Ram still had not regained the memory of her other precious half. So their relationship was still in the process of being rebuilt, with Ram coming to terms with it. Roswal. I see, that's auspicious. But if that's the case, I'm in a bit of a tight spot. I wonder if anyone else in our camp could teach Subaru-kun a lesson. Emilia. Ah, you want me to try it? I'm a little bit strong these days, so it might be dangerous, but I'll do my best to go easy on you. Subaru. So if I'm bludgeoned to death, or seriously injured by Emilia Tan's slender arms, it's going to look way too bad on the outside. Emilia made a suggestion on behalf of Roswal, who was troubled by the idea. However, Subaru could be bludgeoned to death by her slender arms, and this was also a matter of Subaru's pride. As someone who wanted to become stronger for Emilia, it felt strange to be the one asking for lessons from her. Just as Subaru was worrying about the contradiction, Subaru. Someday become strong enough to defeat me. I'm definitely not against that style of heroine with a fighting student-teacher relationship, but I always want to look cool in front of Emilia Tan. Emilia. Even without doing that, I always think Subaru looks cool. Subaru. Jaya, the love is killing me. And just when Subaru was torn between two opposing forces by Emilia, who had no ill intentions or ulterior motives. Frederica, Master, you have already made up your mind, correct? Please do not be mean and make trouble for Subaru-sama and Beatrice-sama. So said Frederica, her gaze sharpened, as she glared at Roswal's side. Huh, Subaru said, and Emilia and Subaru's eyes widened. Roswal closed one eye and narrowed his blue eye mischievously as he muttered, Did they figure it out? Subaru. They figured it out. Oi, come on, you've got to be kidding me. This is serious. Beatrice. Subaru, there's no point in saying it, I suppose. This man has always been able to keep himself youthful by messing with others in this way, in fact. He is such a creature, I suppose. Emilia. Well, is that so? Then the usual shenanigans, Subaru. Emilia Tan believes. Beatrice's point of view and Emilia's point of view were their own honest, believable opinions. Both of them were very cute, so Subaru was determined to watch over them without scolding them. Anyway, Roswal interrupted with a single cough from that point of view. Roswal. As for Subaru-kun's request earlier, as Frederica said, I have an idea. I know a place like a vocational training center that can come in handy in times like this. Subaru. Yo, you have such a convenient place. Maybe like a temple for job changes. Frederica. I do not know much about this temple for job changes, but Subaru-sama was at this place until a few days ago. Subaru. A place I had been until recently. It had been said that the one that reached a certain level was not a temple where jobs could be changed, but a place in recent memory, and Subaru immediately opened his mouth with an awe. It was the place where the people who escaped from the sanctuary, Subaru, and the others who lost their mansion temporarily took refuge before moving their home base to the new Roswal mansion, Emilia. Anne's house. Then his training partner is Subaru. That little girl is training with me. You can't simply accept that a little girl is a good training partner, no matter how much you want to ouch. Emilia. Of course not. It's Clin-san, Clin-san. Subaru's ears were tugged by Emilia, who gave him a look that meant stop. Not so much chastisement as the expected scolding. Subaru nodded his head and said, "Ah, Subaru. Clin-san, huh? No, I talked to him a little bit while he was taking care of me at Anna Rosejan's place, but I don't know him that well." Roswell. Clind was originally a servant who has been with me for a long time. Well, Frederica knows more about the details than I do. Isn't that right? Frederica. Huh, yes, I guess. Reluctantly so. Frederica nodded her head, slightly upset, as she was forced to talk. While wondering about this reaction, Subaru remembered the appearance of a beautiful, thin-faced man. Subaru. But still a vocational training center. A setting where the proper servant is the one who knows all things, is really cool, like a manga or video game. Emilia, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying, but it's true that Clin-san is a good teacher. He has been a great help to me. Subaru. Really, Emilia was taken care of by him when? Why? Emilia's words assured him of Clin's abilities, but Subaru wondered if there had been any contact between the two of them during their recent stay that would have produced such a guarantee. Emilia shook her head and said, "No, it's not that, Emilia. In fact, before I came to the previous mansion, I was mistaken for a maid for a few days, and during that time, Clin-san and Frederica taught me to be a maid." Subaru. Emilia Tan was a maid, in a maid's outfit. Emilia. Yes, I was. I know it was short-lived, but I did my best. Emilia, proudly beaming, slowly chewed on her words. Subaru understood the situation and then fell to his knees in a heap. Subaru. Why wasn't I there, ah? Emilia. Hey, what's wrong, Subaru? You look like you're about to cry. Subaru. I'm disqualified as a knight for missing out on Emilia Tan's maid outfit. Emilia. What does that have to do with anything? Emilia's eyes turned into a blank stare as Subaru burst into tears and sobbed. But it was not a joke. Subaru regretted that he had not been there. Emilia's maid's uniform must have been as beautiful as a goddess. Subaru. That's right, you can still wear it. Emilia. Well, no, that's not true. A maid's outfit is a maid's work uniform, so I can't wear it since I am not a maid. Subaru. Gwa. There was a curt reply, and once again, Subaru slumped. Emilia is troubled by Subaru's overreaction, but Beatrice and the others could only sigh. This was a royal selection candidate, and her knight was at the center of the camp. Roswell. It's really worth your support. Don't you think, Sue? Frederica. Unlike the master, I would like to realize it in a different way. Frederica replied with a bitter smile to Roswell's chuckling gaze. Aside from these two, Beatrice crouched down next to Subaru, who was slumped over. Beatrice. Look, don't dwell on it forever, I suppose. If you want to see a maid's outfit, I suppose. It can't be helped. Betty can wear it for you, in fact. Subaru. Biko, I'm glad you feel that way, but that's not the same thing as this. Beatrice, how dare you, I suppose. Beatrice was outraged that her attempts to comfort him had been so disrespected. Regardless, you could say that the direction of the story had came together. Roswell. Subaru-kun's level up, was it? I'll leave that to Clind. By the way, Emilia-sama, would you like to accompany him to the Mylode family? Emilia. Me too. Roswell. Yes, Subaru-kun has officially been named a knight. I think it is necessary for you to learn how to act as a nobleman as well. Emilia nodded, muttering the unfamiliar word nobleman as if ruminating on it. Emilia. All right. Do you want me to learn from Clin-san too? Roswell. Of course, it would be possible to be educated by Clind, but it would be more in Emilia-sama's nature to learn by seeing the real thing. It's Anna Rose. Emilia. Wow, from Anne. Roswell. I'm sure she'd love to meet you, Emilia-sama. A way to earn some points, for the sake of a good relationship between the two of you, surely. Roswell suggested, with a deliberate rephrasing. Emilia's eyes lit up at the thought, and she clasped her hands in front of her chest and smiled happily. In the background, Subaru and Beatrice continued their skirmish, and the impression of a disorganized pair could not be shaken. Roswell. I expect you can handle the reins, Thier. Frederica. Me. Roswell. You are to accompany them to the Mylode residence. You're the right person for the job, aren't you? Frederica's master closed one eye and looked at her with his blue eye again. She sighed at Roswell's mischievous attitude, and then Frederica looked at Subaru and the three of them again. The burden was a little too heavy for her, and she bowed, not letting her inner thoughts show. 3, and that was how Subaru and the others came to the Mylode mansion. As it was, Garfield was disqualified from being Subaru's training partner and was somewhat depressed. Otto, who was forced to help Roswell with his extremely busy paperwork, was not along for the journey to the Mylode mansion. Subaru, I've heard that you've had a lot of training too. The next time we meet, we'll both have leveled up so much that we won't recognize each other. 2 years from now, in the royal capital of Lugunica, Otto, are you planning to train until right before the royal selection is over? Subaru added that there was that exchange of words before they left. Anyway, Subaru, that's why I need you to give me and Biko some practice. Beatrice. What, Betty too, I suppose. Subaru. That's because Biko and I are one and the same. We'll be together in sickness and health, in the rain or shine, in the wind and in death. Beatrice. That is not even funny, in fact. As soon as they arrived, without a moment to breathe a sigh of relief, Subaru earnestly requested Clind to train him. Frederica, who accompanied him, was impressed by his forward attitude. At the very least, there was no lie in Subaru's intention to become stronger. Frederica, I do not know what the word level up means, but... Emilia, oh, Frederica, hee, don't worry. Ram says it's called Subaru Speak. Frederica, Subaru-sama Speak. While smiling at the boastful Emilia for some reason, Frederica also admired her protege Ram's sense of style, thinking that Subaru Speak was a straightforward and clear expression. Speaking of proteges, Frederica was worried that Petra, whom she left at the mansion, being annoyed with Ram. Petra, a quick learner and a good judge of character, was on the verge of graduating from her apprenticeship as a maid after just a month or so, but this was the first time she had ever left Frederica's care in earnest. Frederica, if I may say so, I agree with Subaru-sama regarding Ram's leadership ability. Emilia, Frederica, are you worried about Petra-chan by any chance? Frederica, yes, I am sorry. I cannot help but feel uneasy, but I am not sure I am comfortable leaving her alone with Ram to take care of the mansion. Frederica frowned and expressed her concern, but at Frederica's words, Emilia put her finger to her lips and said, Emilia, I don't think you have to worry so much. Ram is mean like that because she chooses her partners like Subaru, Otto-kun, and Garfield. Frederica, that just makes it sound like the girl hates men. But in reality, there was no such thing as Ram hating men. Frederica and Ram had known each other for a long time, but surprisingly, Ram's attitude had not changed at all since before she turned 10. She saw them as equals, regardless of gender. The trouble with Ram was that she kept them slightly below herself. Frederica, in that respect, Petra has the personality to get along with anyone. Indeed, I may have worried too much. Emilia, yeah, I'm sure you're right. I've been worrying about Subaru and the others for a long time, but I wasn't sure I could convince you. Emilia sticks out her tongue slightly, reflecting on what she said. However, Frederica had secretly bought into Emilia's high self-esteem. There was no conceit in Emilia, something that everyone else seemed to have. There seemed to be a lack of confidence in the past, though after returning from the sanctuary, humility or even modesty had become a virtue. On top of that, she was eager to grow. This would be a strong weapon for her in the future as she took on the high bar of the royal selection. However, other candidates for the royal selection also possessed that weapon. In some cases, their natural environment allowed them to continue developing it. It's just that they were finally on the same stage, stranger. That is why Uncle sent Emily to my mansion, correct? Frederica. Yes, that is correct, Anna Rose Sama. So said Anna Rose, having read Frederica's mind and tilted her cup. Still very young, less than 10 years old, the head of the Mylode family had an intelligence and judgment disproportionate to her pretty appearance. This was because her upbringing did not allow her to be a mere little girl. To be honest, Frederica once took pity on her for that. However, now that Frederica saw her sitting around a tea party with Emilia, she thought it was a sense of profaneness. Or maybe Frederica. Did the master know that Anna Rose Sama would end up like this? Roswell L. Mathers, was a man of all plots and schemes. He was a schemer who used the domain and people he was obligated to protect, and the sanctuary and its inhabitants that he had been protecting for generations, as pawns in his plot. And he admitted his defeat to Subaru and Emilia and apologized for his past actions and made a promise not to ever repeat them. But Frederica didn't believe that Roswell had been so resigned that he was willing to give up everything he'd built up over the years. Anyone who truly wanted to achieve something was unlikely to give up. Frederica believed that insatiable persistence and a willingness to work hard to make one's desires come true were the most important qualities needed to make it happen. In this respect, was there really anything that could compare to Roswell? If Roswell was willing to make every effort to achieve his goal, he might even incorporate the existence of the girl, Anna Rose, into his plan. She was the daughter of a family member and a friend of Frederica, who had been her guardian since she was born. She thought she would be able to handle such an existence. Subaru and Beatrice, Anya, Frederica, hic. Perhaps because she was so lost in thought, Frederica's shoulders jumped at the renewed scream. If you looked at it, in the garden of the Mylode mansion, Subaru and Beatrice had been defeated by Clind for the 20th time in total. Frederica liked to say that they were doing a great job, but she did not think they were going to get much credit from Clind if they just kept plugging away in the dark. But that did not mean he would not politely explain everything. Clind was that kind of man. Emilia, oh, again, they're both lucky they didn't get hurt, though. Anna Rose. Emily, it is not that. It is not because they are lucky that Subaru and Beatrice are not injured. It is because of Clind. Emilia. Huh, Clind-san? Emilia, who was worried about the upturned pair, widened her eyes at Anna Rose's explanation. It must have been hard to believe. However, Clind, the versatile butler, was capable of doing just that. To not let the challenger get injured, and allowing them to challenge him as many times as they could without breaking down. He had decided that this was the role he was expected to play, and so he did that. Frederica. He is the kind of training partner Subaru-sama and Beatrice-sama need that Garf cannot make up for. Emilia. Clind-san is such a remarkable person. Emilia exhaled in admiration, and Frederica narrowed her eyes at her surprise. In terms of trust, Ram was the one that Roswell relied on the most. Having said that, this perception recently changed, and there had been times when Roswell faltered in the face of Ram's aggression, but Ram's presence was still unshakable in terms of trust. However, when it came to being a right-hand man in terms of ability, that would definitely be Clind. He had been with Roswell for a long time and was a versatile family butler who was heavily used in all situations. In the past, Frederica had heard that he and Roswell were not a master and servant, but in a contractual relationship. Frederica had a memory of a time from her childhood when she used to ask him about every little thing to gain his attention as he worked tirelessly for Roswell. Frederica, shame my memory of shame. Emilia. What's wrong, Frederica? Your face looks really red. Anna Rose. You can leave her alone, Emily. It happens sometimes. Frederica has a very difficult personality. Putting her hand on her burning cheek, Frederica confronted her shame. While Frederica was distracted, Anna Rose turned to Emilia and said, Now then, Anna Rose, I have a letter from Uncle to teach Emily how to behave as a nobleman. So, for a few days, you will accompany me to the nobility's meetings and soirees. How does that sound? Emilia. I'm fine with that. But are you okay, Anne? I'm Anna Rose. The Mylode family is a branch of the Mathers family. Of course, there is no difference in policy between Uncle and me. I am also supporting Emily in the royal selection. After saying that, Anna Rose continued with the word, however. Anna Rose. I would have supported Emily even without Uncle's support. Emilia. Thank you, Anne, but make sure you listen to what the other candidates have to say. It's really important, so don't just take sides just because I'm your friend. Anna Rose. Is this not usually the part where an emotional Emily hugs me? Frederica thought she should say something nice, but Anna Rose would be upset if she was told so directly. She was completely knocked off the ladder. Emilia would not have such bad intentions. It was a sign of her good nature to make others think it over properly, even if it did not benefit her. Emilia. Sorry, But if Anne says so, I'll take the opportunity to study properly. Anne arose. Yes, that is better. I will tell you, I do not want you to be the fluffy Emily you have always been in social situations. You need to look sharp. Amelia. Sharp, I'll do my best. Sharp. Amelia's cheeks stiffened just a little bit, as if she was putting more effort into her facial muscles. Perhaps it was her own form of sharpness. It looked like she had a long way to go. However, Anna Rose put her hand on her cheek at Amelia's healthy appearance and said, Emily is so hardworking and cute. And with that, the policies of Amelia and Anna Rose were established. Anna Rose. It is about time. There was some movement over there. Anna Rose, who had tightened her blurry expression and regained her sense of leadership, muttered. When Amelia twisted her head, she said, Huh. Subaru. Hey, Biko, you've got to do better than that. We're always getting beat up. Beatrice. It's you, Subaru, who should trust Betty's judgment, in fact. Subaru is an amateur at fighting, so Betty's judgment is more accurate, I suppose. Subaru. Don't be ridiculous. Don't act like you're a veteran after being cooped up for 400 years. Beatrice. How dare you say that, in fact? Subaru, quit messing around, I suppose. In the middle of the garden, Subaru and Beatrice, who had fallen to the ground on their butts, started arguing. They seemed to be having a heated discussion and clashed with each other. As it was, the two of them gradually heated up and began to blame each other for their failure. If that happened, there was only one place they would end up. Beatrice. Break up, in fact. Betty made a big mistake, I suppose. Subaru. You. Okay, I don't even want to understand if that's what you're thinking. Biko's an idiot. You're so stubborn. I won't forgive you until you apologize. Beatrice. That's Betty's line, in fact. Subaru, for your own sake, don't think you'll be comforted when you cry, I suppose. Subaru. Right back at you. As their argument exploded, Subaru and Beatrice let go of each other's hands. They turned away and started going in different directions, leaving Clind behind in the middle of the garden to deal with the two of them. Amelia. Awful, the two of them got into a fight? Frederica. It was bound to happen sooner or later with that partnership. It was a cute fight, though. Amelia. What are you saying? There's nothing cute or scary about a fight. They have to hurry up and make up. Frederica. Amelia-sama. Amelia was flustered by the breakdown between Subaru and Beatrice, with an expression Frederica never expected. Gently holding Amelia by the shoulders as she tried to stand up, Frederica shook her head. Frederica understood Amelia's feelings, but this was not her place. This was a trial that Subaru and Beatrice would need to overcome. Amelia. Frederica, why? Frederica. Subaru-sama and Beatrice-sama have only just entered into a contractual relationship. They are still getting to know each other. Amelia-sama must not intervene in what happens in such a situation. I am sure you will be able to understand that they need to figure it out. Amelia. But is that not enough? Anna Rose. What if they have a disagreement when Emily is not around? Amelia looked back at Anna Rose, her amethyst eyes flickering. Catching her gaze directly, Anna Rose gestured towards Subaru and Beatrice, who had walked off. Anna Rose, the two of them are destined to spend the rest of their lives together, yes. No matter how close two people are to each other, there are always going to be differences of opinion. But Emily cannot be the one to mediate every conflict, can you? Amelia. So, I shouldn't help them make up. Anna Rose. At least this time, I think. Emily's presence seems too much for Natsuki Subaru. So, and then, Anna Rose cut her words short and turned her narrowed eyes to Frederica. Amelia, who followed her gaze and frowned with a, huh. However, Frederica knew her role and quietly bowed by the waist. Frederica. Sorry to be so presumptuous, but I am going to take your place, Amelia-sama. Just a little help, I will gather their opinions. Amelia, yes, if Frederica says so, then we're in good hands. Frederica. Amelia. About Subaru and Beatrice, please. They're both really great and they both love each other, but they are just not on the same page. Frederica was more surprised than disappointed when she was so easily entrusted. Amelia, however, did not notice Frederica's surprise and patted her chest in relief. Amelia seriously believed that Frederica would be fine. Anna Rose. We must live up to Emily's expectations, correct? Frederica. You look a lot like the master when you look like that. Anna Rose smiled wickedly at Frederica, sensing her hesitation. As a servant, Frederica was being very disrespectful to Anna Rose, as she had spoken to her in return. It was on point, and Anna Rose made a heartfelt, sour face of disgust with a Emilia, hee, that's weird. Anne and Roswell don't look alike at all. Anna Rose, Emily, right, yes, of course. Emilia, yes, a little bit similar in the eyes, maybe. Anna Rose, if you are going to comfort me, please make sure you comfort me thoroughly. In response to Emilia's words, which were not meant to be offensive, Anna Rose's voice cracked to complain. Watching the smiling girls interact, Frederica pinched the hem of her skirt and curtsied. Frederica, then I will fulfill my role. For stranger. Frederica, restraint. Frederica left Emilia and Anna Rose's tea party and was about to fulfill her duties when she was stopped by a man who crept up on her without a sound. A calm, cool, unemotional tone of voice. Frederica closed her eyes and responded, "What is it?" without looking back. Frederica, now I have to go and talk to the two of them who have gotten upset because of your unrestrained behavior. Clind, I see, that would be helpful. Splendid. However, since when did the maids of the Mathers family change their customs? Is it not rude not to look at the face of the person they are talking to? Inquiry. Frederica, Hick, please do not be so obstinate. Frederica was criticized for not turning around, so she turned around and bared her fangs. When she turned around, she saw the face of a man wearing a monocle right in front of her nose, and she recoiled. Frederica, your distance is wrong. Clind, my apologies, unexpected. I forgot how much you had grown. Forgetfulness. Frederica, did you mean to be so sarcastic? Frederica glared at the man while she placed a hand on her chest, wondering if he was trying to pick a fight with her. To her annoyance, such a glare did not affect the composed Clind's expression. In fact, since the time Frederica first met him, she could hardly remember a time when she had been able to break through his mask of composure. When she was still a little girl, it seemed that Clind would sometimes smile at her. However, this was due to Clind's bad habit of admiring little children, and nothing more, nothing less. In fact, since Frederica has matured into a woman, her relationship with Clind continued to deteriorate. The reason why her heart skipped a beat earlier was due to shock and aversion. Probably. In response to Frederica's harsh question, Clind shook his head and quietly said, "No." Clind, I am sure I do not need to tell you, watching from the sidelines, but the argument between Subaru-sama and Beatrice-sama was a spur-of-the-moment affair. Instantaneous. Frederica, I understand. To be honest, I was surprised to see how well they get along. Clind's advice was a fact that Frederica had seen every day at the Roswell mansion. Frederica also worked with Ram at the mansion before she was transferred around the time of the royal selection. Having rarely seen Beatrice outside of the Forbidden Library, she only ever exchanged the most perfunctory of conversations with her and kept her distance out of reverence. Now that she had left the Forbidden Library, she was playing with Subaru like a little child, showing up at every meal, and chatting casually with Frederica. It was like a miracle. The relationship that had brought about this miracle must not come to an end. Clind, accordingly, the master expects you to fulfill the role of a buffer. Request, Frederica. Yes, that is why you are accompanying me. It is always the standard procedure for training new employees. Frederica shrugged her shoulders and wondered who was in a worse position, him or her. A big fight between Subaru and Beatrice, the emergence of such problems was to be expected. Originally, the Mylode household served as a training ground for displaced demi-humans, whom Roswell would bring in and employ as servants, giving them work and teaching them the proper etiquette. Naturally, Clind would educate them, but the next highest-ranking servant after Clind, who was the head of the household, would have an equally important role to play. That was Frederica's role while he was with the Mylode family, and she was probably the person Clind worked with the longest. Clind had an unrelenting outpouring of strict educational policies for new employees. Frederica comforted them, appeased them, and made them face the tasks again with renewed spirit. That was a standard procedure for their interactions. The fight between Subaru and Beatrice was part of that. Frederica, I know what I have to do. What exactly are you trying to say? Frederica questioned Clind, confirming her role without needing to be told again. He went out of his way to point out the details of her work and ridiculed Frederica's poor performance. As expected, Clind was not a person who would be so duplicitous. He was loyal to his work and fulfilled his duties. So Frederica couldn't blame him. Clind, I am the one who told the master to send you over this time. Confession. Frederica, huh? That was why the unexpected comment was a bolt out of the blue for Frederica. Frederica's eyes widened, and she stared at Clind as he said this. Clind, with his usual expressionless face, narrowed his eyes behind his monocle. Clind, the other day when the master stayed at our residence, you left immediately to prepare the new mansion. Thanks to that, we were not able to talk properly. Consideration. Frederica, you went out of your way to talk to me? With her surprise still intact, Frederica pondered over Clind's true intentions. However, she couldn't think of anything. When Frederica's mind was troubled by this, Clind took a breath and said, Was Clind, Frederica, I am glad you were able to liberate the sanctuary. Congratulations. Frederica, ah. Clind, I know why you left your home and took my teachings under the master's protection. That is why I wanted to tell you properly. Conclusion. It was a smile so subtle that only those who were used to seeing his unchanging expression over the years and had closely studied any changes in his expression would notice it. Frederica, it was an expression that she had not seen for several years and thought she would never see again. It was a smile so small that it could only be noticed by those who had once followed Clind's back, calling him Ni-sama, Ni-sama. That smile with her palm on her chest, she once again felt her heart pound. Frederica, hick, such an unpleasant man. As if to disguise the feelings that arose within her for a moment, Frederica raised her voice. The softness that had been there disappeared from Clind's expression when he heard this. He sighed deliberately with a HMPH. Clind, why can you not even accept my congratulations? Your stubbornness disgusts me and makes my head ache. It makes me want to curse my lack of power to correct the situation. Incompetence. Frederica, yeah, I know you do. I am sure you must have a lot of headaches seeing me as I am. HMPH, this serves you right. Clind, ha! As soon as Frederica snorted and regretted turning her face away like a child, Clind snickered at her. Her face became hot, but she could not look back with a red face now. With the momentum of turning her face away, Frederica tried to return to her original goal. In other words, Frederica had to persuade Subaru and Beatrice, which was her original role. Frederica, I think we are done here. I will be joining the two of them, However, just as she was about to step away with a long stride, uncharacteristic for an elegant maid, Frederica noticed a hint of a gaze being directed at her and looked up to find Subaru. Hello, Beatrice. That's why Betty said we should try not to get found, in fact. In the corridor connecting the garden and the mansion, Frederica and Clind were being watched from a distance as they argued, and Subaru and Beatrice were leaning against each other with awkward looks on their faces. Before Frederica knew it, the two of them, who were supposed to have been in a heated fight earlier, were now holding hands. Frederica, Subaru-sama and Beatrice-sama, your hands. Subaru, hands, yeah, we made up, you know. I was just a little pissed off, and I said too much earlier, Biko. Beatrice, well, Subaru apologized to me, so he is forgiven, I suppose. Betty was just starting to think that he wasn't listening well, in fact. The two of them replied, lifting their joined hands in front of the trembling Frederica. Unlike the previous training sessions for new recruits, the two of them made up easily, and Frederica could only be stunned with an is that so? Of course, it was a good thing that they had reconciled. The original goal was to improve the relationship without Emilia's intervention, so that was no problem. If there was a problem, it was that Subaru. Hey, Frederica, are you and Clind-san on bad terms? Beatrice, Betty and Subaru can talk to him, I suppose. You should compromise, in fact. Frederica, hick. Sure enough, the subject of their earlier argument was brought up, and Frederica choked up. There were many things Frederica wanted to say. In the first place, she didn't want to be told this by the two people who had been fighting just before or take it out on the people who had made this situation happen. Clind, Subaru-sama, Beatrice-sama, I am glad to see that you two have reunited your hands. Fortuitous. Frederica was at a loss for words as she struggled with her many emotions. Clind, who stepped forward to take her place, praised the two for naturally overcoming their challenges. When he said that, Subaru and Beatrice both said, Really?" looking at each other with no ill will. Clind, "If the two of you could learn to compromise, things would have been different. Then you will be able to see the next steps ahead. An amazing rate of growth." Shook. Subaru, "Hey, you hear that, Biko? Clind-san is shaking at how much we've grown." Beatrice, Of course, I suppose. With Betty and Subaru, any challenge will fall apart in a flash, in fact. The fear is yet to come, I suppose." Subaru, "Aw, that's some big mouth for someone so tiny." The fact that they accepted the obvious flattery without questioning it was proof that they, like Emilia, were good at heart. Despite the unexpected commonality between master and servant, Frederica's humiliation at being maliciously berated has not been resolved in the slightest. "Anyway, Clind, then let us consider the next step. Do you know my way of overcoming obstacles? Trial and error." Subaru, "Oh, that's the thing. I think it would be better if I could use some tools, too, instead of relying on Biko all the time." Beatrice, "Why, you don't think he can count on Betty alone, in fact." Subaru, "That's not true. I don't want to slow you down. I want to help you." Beatrice, Subaru. Beatrice's eyes sparkled with admiration at Subaru's determination as he clenched his fists firmly. It was good that they were getting along, but was it Frederica's imagination that Beatrice, who used to look so dignified and intelligent, seemed to have lost a lot of her wisdom? Or was it perhaps just her own feelings of helplessness that were making her see things in that way? Clind, "You want a tool, not a sword or a bow, but a tool. Novel." Subaru, "You can't expect me to be able to compete with Reinhard and Julius even if I trained hard with a sword now. If that's the case, it's better to learn one technique that will surprise at first sight so that I can handle different situations." Clind, "Well, that is an interesting idea. Creative." Subaru, "Ha ha. Well, the surprise at first sight is an idea I got from a guy I don't even like to remember." Beatrice, "Whatever the source, it is to Subaru's credit that he found a way to use it, I suppose. Betty is also proud to be his partner. In fact." Despite this ongoing drama, Subaru and Beatrice were able to assemble a plan for the future. With his serious and thoughtful attitude, Clind would probably find the most optimal answer for Subaru and Beatrice. In fact, immediately after, Clind held up a finger, and Clind, "I have come up with a few candidates. Let us take them out of our storehouse. Treasured items." Subaru, "Oh, really? Well, since you're here, we'll go with you." Beatrice, "Betty will see if it is worthy of Subaru with my own eyes, I suppose." Subaru and Beatrice appeared to be very motivated, and Clind led them as they began to walk away. The destination was the Milode family's storehouse, where they had a set of tools to train their servants in martial arts. The idea was to find a weapon suitable for Subaru, Clind. "Frederica, when you have finished throwing your tantrum, go back to Anna Rose Sama and Emilia Sama." Hospitality. Frederica let out a sigh of annoyance as she watched the detestable man easily divert Subaru and Beatrice's interest and then disappear from her sight. The plan was for their lessons away from home at the Milode's residence to last for 10 days. Frederica, so, Clind and me for 10 days. Is this the master's plot, too? Did Roswell think this humiliation and resentment were some plot that would lead to a better future? Frederica was not sure if Roswell was hoping that she was aware of his intentions and was trying to figure out what was best for her. If that was the case, Frederica, "Very well. If that is what the master wants, then I will try to break out of my shell and take on the challenge. Yes, Petra and Garf are also doing their best, but it would be shameful if I were to stand with them with no growth." With that decision made, Frederica made up her mind. It would be a big mistake to follow them, as if they had the mindset of a bridesmaid, a servant, or even a bystander. In the Emilia camp, which was lagging behind the other camps, those that couldn't move forward couldn't keep up the fight. What they needed was growth, or Frederica. A level up, was it? When Frederica said the words out loud forcefully, they seemed to give her some kind of energy. Energized by these words, Frederica began to walk away from the weak, infantile tossing and turning of her mind that she had been doing until just before, and to obtain a self that was unfazed by anything. The royal selection had just begun. The Amelia camp, which was participating in it, had just begun. As a result of this 10-day lesson, Subaru began to walk the path of an unusual night with a little girl in one hand and a whip in the other. And Amelia, who participated in many soirees and meetings with Anna Rose, was recognized not as a silver-haired half-devil, but as a soiree crasher. While Frederica, enthusiastic and determined to do her duty, was doing her best, Roswell sneezed back at the Roswell mansion. Roswell. She's always had a tendency to assume things, doesn't she? However, the pink-haired maid who heard this did not mention it, so it never reached Frederica's ears. And